Hi, I am Dr. Hannah Nazri. I am the Director of the Malaysian Doctors for Women and Children. I am also an academic fellow in obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Warwick, Board of Advisory member of the Asian Network to NFGM. I'm also the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists Global Health Trainees Committee, and I'm also Treasurer of the Board of Directors of the Boston Congress of Public Health. And today's agenda is, well, you're having this introduction from me. I'll be talking a bit about clitoral anatomy, followed by the medical gaze and femoral genital cutting by Professor Yufu Iguchi, an argument supporting the criminalization of female genital cosmetic surgery by Saarrah. And then we have some panel discussions and a Q&A to the floor. So if you have any questions, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and I will read out your questions during the Q&A session. So who are the Malaysian Doctors for Women and Children? We are an informal academic forum. We are a group of Malaysian doctors who are passionate about the academic and scientific discourse of non-medical cultural practices that affect women and children, and of health inequalities experienced by minority groups in Malaysia. And all Malaysian doctors contributing to MDWC or the Malaysian Doctors for Women and Children generously offer their time without any pay and balancing this commitment with clinical work in hospital practices and academic settings across Malaysia and the UK. Any project funding stems from collaborative endeavors with educational institutions or affiliated organizations, but otherwise, most of it comes from our personal pocket money. So in this case, I would like to thank the Boston Congress of Public Health for allowing us to use your Zoom account. And the views expressed by the presenters do not necessarily reflect the Boston Congress of Public Health, and sponsorship does not imply endorsement of the content. So everything that's being said in this webinar is views expressed by the presenters and the Malaysian Doctors for Women and Children. And just to go over the brief overview of female genital mutilation, as by the WHO classification, there's 4 types. They're all non-medically indicated genital modifications, which include type 1, which is removal part of the clitoris or the entire clitoris. Type 2 is excision of the clitoris with some excision with the labia minora plus or minus the labia majora. And type 3 is removal of all the tissues, and then to suture the area to relieve a small hole for menstruation and then passing urine. And type 4 includes all other harmful procedures, which includes cauterization, cutting, or needling the clitoris, which is the type that we see in Malaysia. And to an increasing extent, we also see type 1 as well. So just going back to clitoral anatomy, because this is the area of focus in Malaysia, if I could draw you to the area which is circled, we have the descending segment of the clitoral body, which is covered by the clitoral hood, which is the skin. In some textbooks, you call it the clitoral prepuce, and the clitoral hood is just the skin overhanging the glans, which is at the bottom. And if you see the diagram on the right, you can see how superficial the veins and the arteries are to the clitoral body. So looking at some studies, we see there's a lot of fibers in the clitoral dorsal nerves compared to the human hand. The nerve fiber density in the clitoral dorsal nerves are higher, and the mean clitoral shaft or the clitoral body in adults is 37 millimeters. If we compare it to a child's clitoral body, which is around 0.6 millimeters to 0.87 millimeters. This is confirmed by 2 studies. We can see there's a growth potential of 400 times. And therefore, like whatever we cut has serious implications. And what are the immediate complications of type 1? Severe pain, gentle swelling, hemorrhage, wound infections, including tetanus, which can lead to sepsis and death. Long-term complication includes chronic pain due to trapped or exposed nerve endings, keloid scar, neuroma, cysts, which could become infected, and sexual dysfunction. And overall, the psychological impact, shame and stigma for belonging to a culture that practices female genital cutting. Women who experience sexual dysfunction may avoid intimate relationships, potentially leading to sexual phobia. This can have serious repercussions on childbearing and marital happiness. Wrongly or rightly attributing chronic pelvic pain to female genital cutting. Obviously, there are other causes of chronic pelvic pain, which I wouldn't go into much detail in this particular webinar. Or wrongly attributing not being circumcised to marriage failure is what we see as well in Malaysia. So that's a whirlwind stop on the clinical perspective of female genital cutting, a bit on clitoral anatomy. Obviously, if you have any questions, you're most welcome to ask me. But the focus of today's talk will be on the medical gaze. So we've talked about the clinical aspects of female genital cutting. We're going to talk about the philosophical aspect of female genital cutting and the medical gaze, and then we're going to talk about some of the biases and why female genital cosmetic surgery is not seen as female genital mutilation, and whether it should be seen as female genital mutilation and whether it should be criminalized. I think the reason why I've brought all our speakers here today is because Malaysia is still trying to understand our own practices of female genital cutting and female circumcision, and therefore we're trying to learn the best practices. We're trying to obviously not objectify women. We're trying to respect women and their autonomy, and we're trying to understand how female genital cosmetic surgery, which some say should be criminalized, is not criminalized. So before I do that, I would like to also bring your attention to this leaflet, which you may want to scan the QR code for. It has everything on clitoral anatomy and what I've just spoken before. And right, now going over to Professor Yufu Iguchi from Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, Japan. She will be talking about medical gaze and female genital cutting, and I'll stop sharing my slides for you to share your slides, Professor.
Okay, I will share my slides. Wait, where's my slides? Just a moment, please. Okay. Something wrong. Do I share my slides now, or?
I can see your slides.
Okay.
They
Okay.
look great.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Hannah. Thank you very much, Dr. Sirs, invite me to this wonderful webinar. So my name is Yufu Iguchi. I'm from Japan. Like I'm teaching gender studies and cultural studies in Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University in Japan. So today's talk, the title is Medical Gaze and Southeast Asian FGC. Okay, yeah. So this is the table of contents. So I introduce today's topic and showing theoretical frameworks, talks about a bit about the medical gaze, the situation at FGC in Southeast Asia, and then I talk a little bit about the FGC through the medical gaze, then conclusions. So today's...
Sorry, but Iguchi, I don't mind. Are you sharing your slides now? Because I can't see your slides.
Okay, wait, probably something wrong.
I could see her slides. You could
really? Wait,
yeah, okay. Yeah, I can see the slides as well.
Okay, I think, but
don't worry about it then. Please continue.
Okay. But probably like something wrong with my things, like just wait for a moment. Give me a second. because like I can't really see my PowerPoints in the share documents. Then I share the desktop. Is it okay for you? Like I
You can-
share the desktop, like
I
can
can see
you
I can
see?
see your slides. If you look at the very top, there's like, I don't know if you can see where it says your screen and then the webinar overall.
Okay, because like was something wrong with my computer probably, like
Oh, no, it was
It's
working.
fine.
okay.
It's fine.
I continue. Yeah.
Yes,
So
you're doing
anything
great. Yeah.
like wrong, just probably something is okay. Yeah. Today's objectives is to consider the practice of Southeast Asian female genital cutting, or FGC, in terms of the medical gaze. So then I talk a little bit about what the medical gaze is and how the situation of FGC in Southeast Asia, and why do medical practitioners do the non-therapeutic, non-medical practice. Then I hope that this might show some insights to consider the issue of cosmetic genital surgery, which is Dr. Saarrah's issue. Okay, so today's presentation is basically based on this, our chapter with Prof. Rashid and Ms. Afika. They are my research partners, which is in this book called Female Genital Mutilation Cutting. You can get it like online. I mean, like it's an open access book and chapter. So let me start from the theoretical framework. So basically, modern medicine sees FGC as an inhuman practice. However, Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, questions the idea of progress and universality in modern medicine. So today's topic is to show like how we can see FGC from Foucault's viewpoint. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about Michel Foucault. He's a French philosopher, and he was also interested in psychology. He got BA in psychology and diploma in psychopathology. And he wrote a lot of interesting books, including The Birth of the Clinic and The History of Sexuality. Then his work influenced a lot to, for example, like anthropology, criminology, cultural studies, feminism, literary theory, psychology, and sociology. So according to Foucault, modern medicine restructures the concept of the human body. So modern medicine uses the binary set of health versus disease and the concept of the model man, or the healthy man, not woman. And then it controls individual human bodies and populations. So under this view, which is the medical gaze, the human bodies and the human body is seen as a machine, and the population is seen as the species body. So in the 19th century, modern states started to use the medical gaze to control its population. And it is called the state medicine systems. The state medicine systems control individuals and populations according to the binary set of health and disease. Then this system spread to colonies. So the colonial governments started to control its residents, like a colonial peoples, using the same set of health and disease. So the colonial people are now seen as like ill. Okay, so let me move to the female body discussion, how modern medicine sees the female body. By 18th century, before the modern medicine, So the women and men's bodies were observed from the perspective of similarity or the same-sex model. Thomas Lacker says organs that had been seen as interior versions of what the male had outside, construed as of an entirely different nature. So you can also check this this figure, which was in 1543. However, at the end of 18th century, modern medicine was formed and the two-sex model became popular. So now the female body started to seen as illness because the female body has organs such as the womb and the ovary that are different from the male body. So this is shown by the existence of the clinical departments such as obstetrics and gynecology, special for women. Then furthermore, modern medicine implicitly has controlled women through the control of their wombs and ovaries in the sense not only the control of the organs function, but also of a moral control of women. So it includes the punishment of immoral women. So you can find a lot of issues from the social state control of the female body, such as birth control, contraception, abortion. So the female body is an object or a tool for reproduction. Then, of course, the women for reproductive rights in the second wave of feminism. Then I think which is also the issue of Dr. Saarrah's topic. Okay, so what happened in the colonies or post-colonies? So the colonial women or post-colonial women were seen ill in double meaning. So they are ill because they are in colonies, and they are ill because they are women. Leno Manderson, who wrote a medical history of Malaya, a wonderful book, states that colonial medicine redefined the female body with respect to reproductive health. So in this sense, women in colonies were seen either mothers or prostitutes. Okay, so how does modern medicine see the practice of FGC? FGC, for modern medicine, female genitals are anatomical objects. So female genitalia as objects are observed and categorized under the medical gaze. The human body was seen as an assembly of different parts. So in this sense, studying FGC, prohibiting FGC, or medicalizing FGC basically share the same grounds. So which is related to the modern control, the modern medical control over the female body. In this sense, medicine has an ambiguous nature. So now I'm moving to talking about the FGC in Southeast Asia. So as Dr. Hana already talked about FGC, so there are FGC practices in Southeast Asia, especially Muslim communities. So you can find the practice in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, southern Thailand, southern Philippines. You can also find the practice among Chams in Cambodia and Vietnam. So Professor Rashid, Ms. Afika, and I studied FGC since 2016. Then we studied the practice in different areas in Southeast Asia, and also we studied the medicalization of FGC in Malaysia. So let me talk a little bit about the features of FGC in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asian FGC has relations with Islam. FGC came to Southeast Asia with Muslim merchants since the 12th century. Then most of them follow Shafi'i school, which they say that female circumcision is mandatory or wajib. Basically, in Southeast Asia, type 4, it's performed. So, which is nicking or pricking the prepuce of the clitoris. And baby girls are circumcised. So it's a bit different from the African practices. We have to note that high FGC prevalence rate in Southeast Asian Muslim communities from 43% to 99%. So people believe that it's mandatory or wajib in Islam. And they say female circumcision or sunat. Female circumcision marks identity as a Muslim woman. And some say FGC reduce women's libido, but the others say FGC or female circumcision might increase women's libido. Then also there are people who say that it's because of hygiene. Sorry. You can find the trend of medicalization, especially in Malaysia and Indonesia. So last time, traditional midwives performed FGC, but now more medical practitioners are performing FGC. And younger population want medical practitioners to perform FGC. So I move to today's core discussion, FGC through the medical gaze. So, is the female body seen by the medical gaze in the practice of FGC? So, is there a relation between the medical gaze and FGC practice? So, I talk it from 3 different points of view. First one is state. The second one is medical doctors or medicalization. The third one is the local people. So number 1 is the state intervention of FGC or state medicine and FGC. So in conclusion, the state's control of FGC in Southeast Asia exists, but is limited compared to Africa. So Indonesia, there's statistics, but the government's attitude is a bit ambiguous. Malaysia, no statistics by the government, but the Department of Islamic Development Malaysia, which is the government's department, recognize the practice from the religious viewpoint. And this department provides anatomical details. So meaning that they use the logic of the body as a machine. So medicalization of FGC. So WHO defines the medicalization of FGC as a situation in which FGM is practiced by any category of healthcare provider, whether in a public or private clinic, at home or elsewhere. Malaysia. Malaysian government is silent on medical practitioners performing FGC, and MMC has not stated its official stand on the practice of FGC among doctors. Actually, we conducted the survey of medicalization of FGC in Malaysia from 2018 to 19. So you can find it in an article published in 2020. So 20.5% of the Muslim doctors in the survey practiced FGC. Most of them had received unofficial training from their colleagues. And 60% believed that FGC was legal in Malaysia. So obviously, the doctors follow kind of medical procedure when they are performing FGC. So they obtain consent. They ask whether patients had infectious disease, bleeding disorders, or other alignments. Then they perform WHO's type 4. And most use local anesthesia. And after the procedure, more than half apply antiseptic. So for them, it's really like a medical procedure. I talk a little bit about the doctor's views. So many people believe that medical doctors should do FGC in the future because of fewer complications and better hygiene, safety, and expertise. Why do you do the practice? The question, like the doctors say, basically because of religion. You know, there is a demand for it because of religion. I have to do it. I am a medical professional, but I still have to do, and there's no other reason for it. About the question of medical benefit, doctors say, I can't tell you. I don't think I can find one. So the questions about why do doctors do non-therapeutic practice? A doctor says, you know, if they, mean midwives, do it in the villages, you never know about the infection control. So you might do it in the clinic. I know how to do it. We also asked like reasons not practicing FGC for those doctors who do not doing. So they said, because they don't have any training to conduct FGC. So the answer is shocking, because like it's not because of the FGC is non-therapeutic practice, but because they don't have trainings. So once they have trainings and skills, they would perform FGC. So let me summarize the doctor's view. Doctors thought that medical practitioners should perform FGC not because of religious reason, but because of medical reasons or medical skills. Doctors thought that traditional practitioners should not perform FGC because of their lack of medical knowledge and skills. Doctors don't find any medical benefits, and doctors who practice FGC thought that it was a non-therapeutic activity. But they are really interested in medical skills. So doctors perform FGC because of their medical skills. Then doctors view the practice of FGC under the medical gaze. Then this might lead to questions about the cosmetic surgery. Why are doctors allowed to operate non-therapeutic cosmetic surgery? So it's because of consent forms, or it's because of standard operation procedures? Okay, so then I move to the third point, which is the local people's viewpoint. So the findings is from a research project in rural Malaysia conducted in 2016. You can find it in our articles in 2019 and 2022. So how do the local people view their practices? The local people didn't know the problem of FGC in Africa. So then for them, FGC is not a problem. Then for them, it's a religious practice. However, they are not in a completely in a traditional world, but they are also like a globalized, modernized. Okay? So medical terminologies and viewpoints gradually came to pervade the local people's ideas and consciousness. For example, younger people prefer medical practitioners than traditional midwives because of medical reasons, because the medical practitioners know more about the human bodies. So that's the change in rural village. Okay, let me conclude my presentation. So I said that there's an increasing medical control over the female body in the present time, which is like objectifying of the female body, including the female genitalia. So the control is promoted by Southeast Asian FGC. Or is Southeast FGC a traditional and religious practice that is not related to medicine? So, first one, state. Distinct state medical control over FGC does not appear to exist in Southeast Asia. It's not like Africa. African government prohibits FGC. However, the medical gaze can be found in the religious resolutions, such as fatwa in Malaysia. Number two, medicalization of FGC. So we can find an ambivalent nature of medicine. To the extent of objectifying the female genitalia, medical practitioners are sharing the same medical gaze, whether they are promoting FGC or attempting. Number three, the local people. Local people initially thought that FGC marked religious identity, but they increasingly came to view it through the medical gaze. So this is it. I hope that my presentation gives you some insights. Thank you very much. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Prof. Iguchi. We'll ask you questions in the question session. Right, moving on, we have Saarrah Ray from the University of Oxford, who will be talking a bit about her thesis. Some of the work is still unpublished, but Saarrah has kindly shared with us some of her research work. Let me just share her slides. Over to you, Saarrah.
Hi, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So I'm Saarrah. I'm a PhD in law student at the University of Oxford. So my presentation is based on my doctoral thesis, Radical Feminism on Reconceptualizing the Design of Vagina as Violence Against Women. Essentially, this thesis is an argument in support of criminalizing female genital cosmetic surgery, which I'll call FGCS, in the United Kingdom. So I'm going to be discussing the legal juxtaposition in the illegality of FGM and the current legality of FGCS from the UK perspective. So still the same slide, yeah. So the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists define FGCS as intimate, non-medically indicated cosmetic surgical procedures which change the structure and appearance of the healthy external genitalia of women, or internally in the case of the vaginal tightening. While the realistic short-term and long-term outcomes of FGCS are varied and uncertain, what is certain is that cosmetic surgeons profit enormously from women's body image anxieties and shame over the genitalia, which has inevitably increased the number of women seeking to feminize the image and utility of their genitalia through FGCS. FGCS is not usually commissioned by the National Health Service, so women often seek to undergo FGCS offered by private clinics. The importance of respect for personal autonomy and being able to freely choose as a competent person in a liberal society seems to warrant the permissibility of invasive cosmetic surgeries that one might choose to undergo. The law currently permits women to give legally effective consent to undergo most forms of FGCS. A patient's consent is only deemed valid consent if she has the capacity to make the decision, acts voluntarily and free from coercion or manipulation, and has sufficient information to make the decision. Now, assuming these elements are satisfied, the patient's choice to undergo FGCS should be supported as a competent one. Meanwhile, other types of invasive incisions to the female genitalia are conceptualized as female genital mutilation, which is recognized as a form of sexual violence against women. Next slide, please, Hannah. So, FGM is criminalised under the Female Genital Mutilation Act 2003 in the jurisdiction of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. This means that consent can never be given to FGM, even if the consent is given by adult competent women, because there is no justification for it. So Section 1, Subsection 1 of the Female Genital Mutilation Act 2003 states that it is a criminal offence to excise, infibulate, or otherwise mutilate the whole or any part of a girl's and woman's labia majora, labia minora, or clitoris. No offence is committed when a registered medical practitioner performs the operation which is necessary for the woman's physical or mental health. The explanatory notes to the 2003 Act states that cosmetic surgery can be deemed a necessary operation for a woman's mental health if she suffers from distress caused by a perception of abnormality. But it is immaterial whether she, the patient, or any person believes that the operation is required as a matter of custom or ritual. Now, feminists have argued that a woman's distress associated with the elongation of a labia minora or the protrusion of a clitoral hood, for example, is likely to arise from pressures of male-dominant Western culture, setting the standard for the perfect vulva and vagina, which is tight and tidy, that is only attainable through cosmetic surgery, not aimed at truly benefiting women's health. It seems that under the explanatory note that Western aesthetic pressures are accepted as legitimate reasons to be justified under the exemption of mental health. Ultimately, in practice, the statutory provisions permit a woman to surgically modify her genitalia to conform to Western cultural norms of vulva-vagina aesthetics and function, but prohibit her from mutilating her genitalia if she's doing so to conform to non-Western cultural norms of vulva-vagina aesthetic expectations. Next slide, please, Hannah. So surely we ought to doubt the authenticity of the consent given when exploitation, coercion, and objectification and shame are present in shaping a woman's decision to participate in an activity that results in serious harm to herself or poses a serious risk of harm to other women. So I have alluded to this sentiment in the explanatory note to my poem, Sisters, This Mutilation, which is published in the Feminist Legal Studies Journal. So I posit, one might argue that these practices, FGCS and FGM, are different because FGM is forced upon girls and women against their will, while women elect to undergo FGCS. Indeed, FGM is used as a patriarchal weapon against women to inscribe into women's bodies what womanhood means and to control how women exercise their sexuality within the confinement of the male gaze. However, it is worth appreciating that FGCS and FGM seem not so disanalogous if we take seriously the depth and harm of sociocultural pressures deriving from a shared system of women's oppression that inform women how to feel what their vulvas and vaginas should look like and whom they service. So it is important for us to think about whether our female needs, interests, and subjectivity are sufficiently understood and valued in a sexualized male-dominant culture where our vulvas and vaginas are constantly treated as socially penetrable, which lends to forging unjustified forms of violence against women into lawfully permissible conduct. And next slide, please, Hannah. So in my thesis, I've limited the scope of the argument to focus on only labiaplasty, clitoral hood reduction surgery, and vaginal tightening surgery, which includes hymenoplasty, for the reason that these specified forms of FGCS are marketed to women as surgeries that can support their liberation by promising enhanced female orgasms, security in romantic relationships, and improving self-esteem or body confidence. However convincing the FGCS's industry's concern is for women's deprivation of these aspects might be, in reality, it is disingenuous when it consults and treats women as a sexual service object and not genuinely as an agent. Although I agree overall that the general lack of genuine interest in women's sexual enjoyment is a clear indicator of women's oppression, I also contend that understanding women's gynecological issues and women's sexual needs is not appropriately cared for by the FGCS industry. Does a woman's orgasm secure her liberation when it first requires infibulating remnants of her vaginal tissue so that her vagina becomes better conditioned for penetration by a penis in order to reach said orgasm? In addition to the NHS confirming that there is no sufficient evidence to prove that FGCS improves women's sexual satisfaction or self-image, and accounts of whether or not sexual intercourse is more satisfying post-FGCS is a medical misogynistic approach to understanding female sexuality. Next slide, please, Hannah. So in my thesis, I'm only focusing on adult competent women electing to undergo FGCS in the UK. I will be focusing on making a two-pronged argument. The first is that there is no valid consent, and the second is that consent cannot be used as a legal defence. I also explored the patriarchal expressions of violence against women vested in the permissibility of FGCS, such as the sexual objectification of women's bodies, the commodification of women's bodies, and the coercion of women's choice. So when thinking about whether the state should criminalise FGCS, we must first ask whether FGCS is a serious harm. If it is, then it is a suitable candidate for criminalisation. Next slide, please, Hannah. So at first, it would be difficult to recognise FGCS as violence when women's magazines and cosmetic marketing strategies rely on popular liberal feminist rhetoric to normalise that undergoing FGCS is an empowering way of healthily caring for oneself. For many commentators, at the core of understanding what acts are harmful and establishing whether a harmful act justifies criminalisation is John Mill's harm principle in his treatise on liberty. So overall, the harm needs to be really serious for the law to prohibit it. And this is usually justified in the interests of the greater public good of society. So Mill's harm principle has been interpreted by Joel Feinberg in The Moral Limits of the Criminal Law to mean that conduct should not be criminal unless it is harmful to other people and threatens society, and that conduct which does not harm other people and does not pose a threat to society should not be criminalised. However, the harm principle in its original formulation does little to define what is strictly meant by a harm. So this has led to extensive debate about the legal meaning of the term, especially from feminist perspectives, which has criticised the criminal law's limited understanding of harm that fails to capture patriarchal expressions of violence against women. So as it stands, the traditional liberal legal paradigm informs me that I should be free to do whatever I want with my body if I have the capacity to consent to the activity, if the activity does not harm others, and if the activity does not degrade or humiliate me. If all three principles are satisfied, then it is recognised that there is no legitimate or appropriate moral basis for the criminal law to intervene with my autonomous decision to participate in the activities of my choosing. Now, if the state were to intrude in my decision-making and void my consent, essentially overriding my autonomy by coercive means to prevent me from what it perceives to be me making a choice resulting in serious harm, then the state intervention would rightly be considered paternalistic. So the libertarian ethic sees any constraint on a person's individual freedom to be wholly bad or an unwarranted restriction. So for this reason, some commentators in favour of Mill's harm principle have argued that the state should not use its constraining power to prevent a competent individual from harming herself or make her submit to doing something that is assumed to be in her best interest of her well-being. However, we might well welcome state paternalism when its purpose is to promote the liberal values of freedom and equality by protecting people from coercion, degradation, exploitation, wherein an act or conduct, despite being pleasurable, risks harming themselves and others. And next slide, please, Hannah. So the act of performing surgery involves intentional violence and results in actual or sometimes serious bodily harm. Here, genuine consent plays a crucial role in determining whether a patient has been wronged when she has suffered harm from undergoing FGCS. So the patient's valid consent given to surgery generally furnishes a defence in itself, which means that the surgeon can perform surgery with impunity from the criminal law. On this view, surgery is a harmful activity where the harm is considered reasonable. A surgeon's conduct is likely considered unlawful when the surgery is performed outside of the medical exemption. meaning that the consent obtained from the patient is invalid, or that the surgery was unreasonable in the sense that the surgery was carried outside the ambit of medical necessity. But most people would not perceive the surgical trimming of the labia minora to be worth deeming treacherous or even promoting dubious benefit when surgeons intend to alleviate women's anxieties over their protruding labia minora, because it is considered reasonable conduct without resulting in a benefit to women's mental health and overall well-being. However, Glanville Williams and Dennis Baker have rejected positions like this for being wholly unconvincing, because in practice, the mental health exemption is being loosely interpreted to allow cosmetic surgeons to perform FGCS not strictly for medical necessity, but for beautification purposes while earning big profits doing so. Next slide, please, Hannah. And there are some serious health risks to some forms of FGCS, even performed for alleged beautification purposes. So for labiaplasty, there could be bleeding, tissue scarring, infection, and damage to the sensitivity of the female genitalia. With regards to clitoral hood reduction surgery, there's a risk of permanent scarring, asymmetry, damage to the sensitivity of the clitoral glands, overexposure of the external clitoris, and loss of sexual arousal, damage to wound healing. And for vaginal tightening surgery, we could have perforation of the bowels, painful sexual intercourse, reduced sexual satisfaction, numbness, bleeding, and difficulty in passing urine, and vaginal prolapse. So suppose health or self-improvement is synonymous with a sexual beauty norm that requires surgically reshaping women into a desirable object and a resource for men's consumption. In that case, we have good reason to doubt whether FGCS is a reasonable harm that is voluntarily consented to, and whether the state should restrain itself from intervening when a patient consents to harm to her genitalia, which someone else, the surgeon, inflicts upon her. Next slide, please, Hannah. So to conceptualize a woman-centered lived experience of oppression under patriarchy, we must first ask a woman-centered question related to women's oppression experienced by a patriarchal system. So earlier in this presentation, I suggest we pose the legal question, is FGCS a serious harm? Now I ask, does the law oppress women by permitting FGCS? So radical feminist theory, which is the framework I am utilizing, exposes a flaw in the legal treatment of FGCS under the liberal legal paradigm. And the flaw is found in the preservation of male privilege or preference for men's needs that currently exists in a statutory loophole that permits and normalizes the infliction of unnecessary harm to women's vulvas and vaginas on the grounds of a publicly tabooed abnormality. The law relies on women's consent to make FGCS permissible, and in doing so, the law is actualizing the vulva and vagina as sexually and aesthetically inadequate. And this suggests that the primary role of the vulva and vagina is reduced to being an effective recipient of a penis and worthy objects to the male gaze, thus holding women accountable for servicing themselves as a sexual object or fantasy. And to a radical feminist, colluding with our own objectification, degradation, and dehumanization cannot liberate women to exercise choice freely and nourish their well-being under an oppressing male-dominant culture. I do not claim that when women consent to FGCS, they are responsible for their own sexual oppression. Instead, I mean that the law permits the unnecessary use of physical force, the invasive surgery, as well as imposing symbolic violence onto women's bodies to maintain women's involuntary subordinated status in law and within society, and seeks to justify that by reference to the consent of those same women. Next slide, please, Hannah. So a goal of patriarchy is to thwart and control women's capacity to embody a powerful female sexuality, which will reflect a nourished form of self-esteem and genuine sexual desire of each woman without shame. For Andrea Dworkin, heterosexual male desire is primarily rooted in the sexual objectification of women, which involves men fetishizing women's bodies as a whole and in its parts, which is treated quite literally as an object that is easy to access, deface, and dispose of. A variation of fetishizing women's genitalia includes erasing the external features of the vulva for visual appeasement and manipulating the vagina to accommodate the penis for penetration. The patriarchal fetishization of women's genitalia determines that women are not whole subjects in and of themselves, but as natural objects made with a whole, synonymous of entry, and with external flesh, synonymous of an unsexy and unkept mess. And next slide, please, Hannah. The fetishization of female genitalia makes it clear that female genitalia have special value in a patriarchal social hierarchy, which makes women's bodies vulnerable to commodification. In a male-dominant culture, a woman's success is defined by her compulsory attractiveness and compulsory sexual objectification. For Melanie Latham, these social requirements are vested in and enabled by the cosmetic surgery industry. FGCS turns women's genitalia into more valuable, expensive, and desirable objects, into designer vaginas. And in turn, women with designer vulvas and vaginas are projected as a competition for other women. In exchange for being able to afford and undergo the harm that achieves a tidy vulva and a tight vagina, women are rewarded with acceptance, respect for respect and love from others, or at least admiration. However, the longevity of these rewards for women's beauty labour is not guaranteed. Women's genuine self-love for their bodies and respect for their bodily integrity and bodily autonomy are unstable in an environment that pressures women into a commitment to suffer an unnecessary loss, a literal loss from their bodies and loss from their money. When women spend their financial resources on modifying themselves into better versions, they are used as better functioning and more useful resources for others to use. Next slide, please. So every choice a woman makes is a choice towards her freedom. But it is often the case that women need to dissimulate from their own desires and comply with patriarchy to live without fear, lovelessness, poverty, exclusion, and setbacks that threaten their survival. The notion of consent under the liberal legal paradigm assumes that there is an equal playing field between men and women, which means that both sexes are considered autonomous and rational agents. In this sense, men and women have the same opportunity to make choices for themselves and experience the result of their personal freedom without being limited by negative external factors such as gaslighting, blackmail, and manipulation. However, radical feminists argue that these forms of coercion are disguised in the language of choice, fulfillment, and liberation to justify practices that physically harm, sexually objectify, and commodify women. See, patriarchal desire still receives satisfaction from denying women from flourishing, which means living without conditions that require women to treat themselves as performative and expendable things for another's gain to no end. Women are not awarded the power or respect in this regard. So what we can learn from radical feminist theory is that consent is not always synonymous with women's liberation when choice is rendered to compliance. Next slide, please, Hannah. So finally, I draw attention to the United Nations zero tolerance to FGM. The Crown Prosecution Service in the United Kingdom recognises that FGCS is captured under the Female Genital Mutilation Act. And perhaps a strict interpretation of the law would mean that an unnecessary nick to the clitoris to the total removal of the labia minora constitutes the criminal offence of FGM. This is why in my thesis, I aim to reconceptualize FGCS as a form of FGM rather than a female empowering and harmless practice. Next slide, please, Hannah. So in conclusion, I argue that there is no valid consent, thus consent cannot act as a legal defence. The individual choice to undergo FGCS negatively affects women's flourishment generally, and that FGCS is an undignified, degrading, and humiliating practice, and through blameless collision with patriarchal demands to conform, women are being subtly pressured to punish themselves through harmful means. Thank you.
Thank you, Saarrah. What a marvelous talk that is. Now, moving on to the questions. Let me just stop sharing the slides. Right, Professor Iguchi, are you there? Right, the first question to you is, how do we ensure that in our advocacy for ending FGM, we do not objectify women and respect their autonomy? How do we avoid over-medicalization of the women's body?
That's a really a big question, which I don't think I can answer. So like, okay, like if we focus on the FGC, I don't talk about FGCS, like not cosmetic surgery. So FGC, in Malaysia or in Southeast Asia. So it's very difficult, like unlike Africa, the Southeast Asian FGC, it's not really like a severe, like compared to Africa. But I know several respondents, like they are Malaysian doctors, female doctors, who said, who talked about the traumatic memories. Like they said that they were circumcised when they were like 3-4 years old. Then she remembers like what was happening, and then she saw that her genitalia was bleeding, and then this like shocking memory came back to her, like every time she had menstruation periods. So meaning like even in Southeast Asian FGC, which is called like a mild FGC, but there's like a traumatic memory. But at the same time, like, so I don't say like, yeah, the FGC in Southeast Asia is okay, but at the same time, because like people believe that it's a religious practice, so it's very difficult to, like just say like a stop FGC. Okay, so I think like we need like something like a kind of education, like a knowledge information to those people. Okay? And okay, so but at the same time, I'm thinking about like the objectification of the female body, which is not limited to FGC issue. It also includes like cosmetic surgery or other things like everything like relating to the female body. So it's really like a big issue. Then I can't say like, okay, stop medicine, right? Because like, yeah, we got a lot of like benefits from medicine, but at the same time, modern medicine has this ambiguous nature. So I can't show you like the complete, how to say, like solution, but what I can say is like how to say, like I want you and I want everybody to start learning this kind of issue, like so how the female body is objectified in this society. So we can't say like just stop, but we start to learn this kind of issue. Like I don't know how to answer this big.
I understand where you're coming from. I think I also want, I mean, how medicine has progressed is from a patriarchal perspective where doctors know everything to a more like shared doctor-patient relationship where we try to respect, where patients respect doctors from their knowledge and doctors respect patients for their own bodily autonomy and consent. So I think in FGM or FGC advocacy, we have to come from a place of compassion. And when we look about how the practice in Malaysia, I mean, it's done by parents who truly believe it spiritually enhances their children. So there needs to be a re-education. We shouldn't, I don't think it's right for anyone to say that they're barbaric, they're from a barbaric culture. Frankly, it's because of ignorance. So I think education should be the first port of call for us to to try. And also, actually, this over-medicalization of the woman's body, it's not just from doctors that I found. It's from everyone, really. Like, just to give an example, I was asked about a product. What if we can measure the hormone, the female hormones throughout your entire cycle? And my question is, like, what exact benefit are you trying to get from that? Oh, so we understand our moods better. But then, like, you are medicalizing your moods according to the cycle. You are medicalizing everything. There is a place to test for things, and there are reasons why we don't test for everything, because of false positives. I mean, if you know about medicine, there are plenty of tests I can do. I can go to a doctor and ask for every single test I want, but because of the false positives, then it may not present the true picture. It may actually cause anxiety. But anyway, I digress. Thank you so much, Professor Iguchi, for your comment. Saarrah, so I understand that hymenoplasty, a form of female genital cosmetic surgery in the UK, is banned. Do you feel there is a bias against banning this practice and not labiaplasty?
Well, it's a really interesting question, Hannah. So what I felt, so I wrote about this in a chapter called The British Campaign to Ban Virginity Testing and Hymenoplasty in the Routledge International Handbook of Harmful Cultural Practices. And while hymenoplasty alongside virginity testing has been criminalised, the government in the UK still hasn't recognised hymenoplasty as FGM. And I wonder that if it had done that, then I think a logical step then would mean that the government would need to lay its eyes on other forms of female genital cosmetic surgery, like labiaplasty. Because once hymenoplasty is recognised as FGM, then we could see the logical steps of recognising, other forms of FGCS as FGM. And I think what it comes down to is big profits, money. I think once they realise that actually these practices are similar to FGM, then you'd lose a big business in the cosmetic industry. So in my opinion, I think on the argument that, or putting forward an argument that these forms of FGCSs should be recognised as FGM, I would place hymenoplasty and labiaplasty in the same bracket.
Yeah, so my understanding is that hymenoplasty is banned because it has certain cultural practices where virginity is seen as a prize thing to have for a woman. And we know which cultures this actually stem from, because but
even in, for example, in Harley Street, white Western women could elect a hymenoplasty to rejuvenate their sex lives. And arguably, that doesn't come from the certain cultures or ethnic groups that are deemed to practice FGM, for example, right? So you can see the racial bias in here as well. Why is it okay to laud and encourage so-called British Western values? I think.
Yeah. There is actually an interesting question here. How will a doctor in UK tell the difference between someone asking for FGM and FGCS? It feels like they would only be going by race and religion of the women, which is really interesting. If I were to present you a hypothetical situation of a 21 Ethiopian woman going to the GP, please GP, could you needle my clitoris? I understand the consequences and I understand the potential risks and complications. Could you needle my clitoris for my own spiritual enhancement? Versus a 21-year-old woman who would go to her GP, please, I don't like the look of my vulva, I would like to have labiaplasty. Which one would the GP report for wanting FGM? We know the answer to, but I'll just leave it to that. Professor Iguchi, do you think we should criminalize FGC in Malaysia? And if so, should we criminalize female genital cosmetic surgery as well, after hearing what Saarrah has been talking about?
I don't think like the criminalization is the good choice.
Yeah.
So because because like in Malaysia, like especially people believe that FGC is religious practice. So if you just ban, prohibit, criminalize, it doesn't work. Like in Africa, so the practice goes underground after the criminalization of prohibition by the government. So I think we should find like a good way to like an advocacy way to find it.
Yeah, I agree with Professor. I think the law cannot be relied as the only tool for change. I think education and also establishing a more relational approach to communicating with people with whom these practices affect is incredibly important to alleviate those pressures that are placed onto the girl child and women in greater society.
Yeah. Can I answer Huda Said's question about the collaboration?
Please do. Shall I just read the question to you?
Yeah.
Right, just for everyone to be aware of. Thank you to all speakers for such an informative session. Since FGC in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and even Pakistan is considered a sunnah or religious obligation in specific Muslim communities, what kind of collaborative measure would you suggest between the medical science and social science field to curb the practice?
Yeah, thank you. So I think this question is related to like Dr. Saarrah's issue. So currently Professor Rashid, like he's my research partner and he's a public medicine professor, and I are collaborating together like public medicine and gender studies. And then like currently we have planned to do some, how to say, kind of advocacy project or enlightenment project in Vietnam. We're using like a mobile medicine, which is like using like a SNS and then sends like information about like a health and including like a FGC or women's health, and then like try to educate, like try to give local people the health knowledge. So like we're doing like a 1 year, 2 years, and then like a measure like how much they, how to say, how much they can learn like the new knowledge about the health. But we are using like a videos or very like a short articles, not a lot of like how to say long articles, but using like a TikToks or something like that. So I think that kind of, you know, like a ways can, how to say, like a help to solve the problems. But that's not only solution, but that would be one of the solution.
Right. Thank you, Prof. Iguchi. I will just go through the questions. There's a question from Said Arif. I suppose, Saarrah, you could answer this. If female genital cosmetic surgery is criminalized as an extension of female genital cutting due to concerns about female body commodification and body image anxiety, what are the implications for other non-therapeutic cosmetic procedures? How can we effectively distinguish between harmful practices that objectify women and those that are considered acceptable forms of bodily autonomy and self-expression?
That is such a really, really good question, Saeed. And I'm actually working on a chapter on that specific question for my thesis. So I haven't completed it yet, so I can give like an overall idea, I suppose. So what I imagine kind of reform I imagine for the FGM Act is to clarify the medical exemption, which would be then to produce a boundary of medical necessity. So when our non-therapeutic cosmetic surgeries, like such as maybe nose surgery or maybe breast enlargement surgery, is medically necessary, because in the context of FGCS, when a labiaplasty is performed, most likely it's done outside of the ambit of medical necessity, so to neaten up the look of the labia. However, there are really valid examples where the labia minora is very long and it's causing friction with wearing underwear and jeans. And I would suggest that then performing a labiaplasty for that benefit, would be a legitimate medical necessity. And I'm not sure, did I miss anything else in that question?
No, and I would like to add to that as well, like as compared to other forms of like cosmetic surgery, the female genitalia, anyone's genitalia, not just male genitalia, holds a special place in the individual's body. I mean, like, it's not something that you go out and parade to everyone. You only show it to people privately, your partners. If someone has rhinoplasty, for example, it's really obvious in the nose, like it's on your face, it's obvious, but you wouldn't show your genitalia to just anyone on the street. This is why the female genitalia, the male genitalia holds a special place. It also holds a special place because it has of its reproductive function and sexual satisfaction as well. So they're very, very sensitive organs. If any nicking, pricking, or needling, or any cutting can potentially like cause a severe harm to the patient in terms of their sexual satisfaction, in terms of pain, in terms of all the complications that Saarrah has kindly listed. And that's why it's different, in my opinion, to other forms of cosmetic surgery. And of course, I think the other question is like, what's your take on non-surgical modifications of the genitalia? What are your thoughts about it?
Non-surgical?
Non-surgical modifications of the genitalia.
So that's like injections, like a it's like G-spot injection. So what's really interesting is that when I was researching the G-spot amplification procedure from the UK perspective, in British clinics, it's titled G-spot amplification surgery, even though the procedure involves injecting, right? So yeah. I think feminist Anne Coote wrote about the myth of the vaginal orgasm, and so I think there's so much that we don't know about the female orgasm in terms of the G-spot itself. So I even wonder, perhaps it's too far to suggest that the medical professions could be inducing fraud by permitting and promoting that kind of procedure, but I think we don't know enough about it, and I think from that perspective, I think it is most likely to be unnecessary, medically unnecessary.
Completely. There's no evidence there's no evidence whatsoever for G-spot enhancement injections. So I don't recommend it to anyone, and I just want to put it out here, like, as a doctor, I have no aspiration of becoming a female genital cosmetic surgeon at any point. I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist by training. Anyway,
may I ask Saarrah like some questions? Like,
oh yeah, yes please. Yeah,
I would like to know, like, so the doctors can legally harm the human body because of therapeutic reason, right?
Oh yeah.
But cosmetic surgery is not medical. So yeah. How are doctors allowed to perform the non-therapeutic cosmetic surgery?
Mm-hmm.
So well, like from the legal viewpoint.
Right, so it's cosmetic surgery is still under the bracket of surgical intervention, according to a leading case law, and the cosmetic surgery industry. There is regulation, like from the British Association of Plastic Surgeons, so there are guidelines there. But when I was talking about the surgery as a harm, I wanted so that came from a legal analysis which was really long, so I tried to reduce it, but it was basically setting up the point that at first instance the law sees any invasive cut to the person as a serious harm, as a form of ABH or sometimes GBH. However, that harm may be exempted if it is done by a medical professional, so surgeon, midwife, and if it is done for the benefit of the patient. And so under the under the exemption to the FGM Act, surgeon, for example, is not allowed to perform FGM. However, if the woman feels that there's an abnormality with her genitalia, then by excuse of the mental exemption, it can a mutilation can be performed for the benefit of the patient's mental health interests. You see.
So that's mental health. It's because of like a male-centric society.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why it's a bit strange. So sorry, I'm just like trying to answer all the questions. How do you say it's like same goes with piercing? What about piercing, genital piercing? Anyone wants to answer this?
Iguchi, do you have any thoughts?
My thoughts. Well, I know the UK law says genital piercing does not amount to any acts of abuse because it's done for
It's called a consent,
personal,
right? Because there's consent, right?
personal satisfaction for body,
Adornment, yeah.
personal adornment like wearing jewelry.
Yeah. And that's also a big conflict in the legal analysis, because what I'm doing is I have to then just make a distinction between, okay, well, when is this an adornment or body modification as opposed to a mutilation. But then I think again we might want to go back to the zero tolerance approach to FGM. So zero tolerance really does mean zero tolerance, right? So no appreciation for any kind of FGM. However, what I do stipulate is that, I think there are certain situations where this might be necessary for the genuine medical benefit of that patient, such as a very long labia minora that causes friction by wearing pants, and that might really disrupt your day, even walking, cause pain. So yeah.
Right. Okay. I can only allow 2 questions left, unfortunately. One question from an anonymous: how can a doctor in Malaysia say to a family that they won't perform FGC in their child in a way that can be seen as educating the family rather than humiliating them? Well, I'm very sad if any doctor, while trying to educate anyone, really humiliates them. I mean, first of all, when we try to educate parents, it has to come from a place of compassion. And the Malaysian Doctors for Women and Children are in the works of preparing an memoir of a leaflet that will help the doctor to explain to the parents about the female genitalia in detail, and also for the parents to like take away, for them to possibly hand it over to someone else as well. So I think most doctors who humiliate patients, humiliate inverted commas, may do it from a place of lack of knowledge, really. They don't really know what to say. They get angry at patients asking them about it and don't really have the right answers. That's my opinion. And the other question is, Saarrah from Anne Maureen, how would you include transsexuality in surgeries and all of this?
That's an interesting question.
I have an answer to that.
Hannah, you
of course, well, that is actually out of the scope of this webinar because the focus is actually on female genital mutilation and female genital cosmetic surgery, which doesn't have any medical indication. So to be honest with you, I wouldn't go into much detail on the transsexual surgeries because it probably is a medical indication for that. It's a bit more complicated and complicated, of course. And I don't feel that I have enough expertise to even answer that in greater detail, to be honest. So if we keep to, I mean, the main agenda today is doctors shouldn't perform procedures that they are not taught to do. And if it's zero tolerance, it should be zero tolerance to any form of non-medically indicated female genital cosmetic surgery.
Yeah, I would echo what you said, Hannah.
You
And also,
agree?
and more generally in terms of my thesis, it's that's transsexual surgery is not within the ambit of my research.
Okay. And like the last question as well, could you say something about what is done to the male body in the form of male circumcision? I have my own opinions on that. I mean, generally my opinion is that you shouldn't perform any, sorry, let me just say this properly. We're just going to take, right. My opinion is that you shouldn't perform any surgeries which is not clinically indicated anywhere, to be honest with you, whether it's genitalia or on any other part of the body. I mean, surgery carries risks, and it's the same with male circumcision as well. So in fact, you have to circumcise 100 boys before you can actually prevent one urinary tract infection. So there's other effective antibiotics for urinary tract infection. So we should give antibiotics, really, not circumcise. But that's from the clinical perspective. I know people feel strongly about male circumcision as a religious requirement. They see it as a form of religious identity, but that's out of the scope of this webinar, so I wouldn't be answering too much about that. All right, I think we're reaching almost 11:30. Thank you so much, everyone. I will check with our presenters if they are happy for us to send out the presentations, if they are happy, or that if they need to make any modifications, they will do so, and then we'll send it out to you. We'll also be sending out feedback forms. If you could fill in the feedback forms, you'll get your certificate. Otherwise, you won't. We'll send it around in an email. So thank you so much for everyone today. And any final thoughts, Saarrah, Professor Iguchi?
Thank you very much.
But thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a really important discussion.
I learned a lot.
Me too.
Me too. All right, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. There's also going to be a survey that will come up in the browser and will also be sent out via email. Thank you.
Okay,
So lovely
you.
meeting you.
Thank you.
All the
Keep in
best.
touch.
Take care.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
please. Yes. Bye.